issue, it looks like we're supposed to have a video playing that kind of introduces kind of the topic at hand, and then everyone's experiences. So because we don't have a video, instead we're going to just we're going to kind of just go with what would have been in that. So if we could briefly have our panelists, we've got Carra, Danisha, and Cardell. If you could just kind of jump on and tell us a little bit about yourselves and your organization. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves that way.
You use this speaker?
Yeah.
You start first. I'll go first. So we're kind of winging it here. Hey guys, I'm Carra Powell, and I am the Memphis Director of Policy and Advocacy over at the Tennessee Charter School Center. And we work to support the charter schools in the state of Tennessee. So as well as work on policy, parent support, school leader support, and all that good stuff. So I have been in this role about 1.5 years. I came in right, I guess, like maybe a month before COVID kind of sent everybody back home to work. So it was an interesting transition, figuring out the role and figuring out my pace and building relationships through COVID. So, but it's been a unique experience, but it's been good. So I'm going to pass the baton over. What?
And a parent.
Oh, that's right. And I am a parent, right? Because we're talking about advocacy and parents. I'm a parent. How could I forget my children? I have 3 children, 19, 18, and 14. So I only have one left in K-12, Sophia. She just started the 9th grade this year. And I will mention, because I mentioned it in the video that we are not able to watch today, that the reason I got involved in education reform, school choice, was because of my experience with my son, Nicholas. When Nicholas was, very early elementary, kindergarten, 1st grade, he really had some struggles and some learning differences. And the educational environment that we had been utilizing wasn't meeting the needs that he had. And so it was in my search of trying to find a school and an environment that would work well for him, that I got involved in education choice. And so that's kind of what brought me to this arena, and I've been around for a long time because Nicholas is 18. He graduated in May. So yay, it all worked out. Danisha, I'll pass it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danisha Fields. I am the Chief of Staff at the Memphis LIF. And what we do at the Memphis LIF, we empower, engage parents to know about the education system here in Memphis, Shelby County, and how we could play a part in making changes so that all children, regardless of their zip code, their economical status, has a fair access and receives a high quality education. I too am a parent, which got me involved in this work. I am also a product of Legacy Memphis City Schools. So beginning to talk about the inequities in education, I witnessed it, I was a part of it, and I feel like I was one of those students who fell through the cracks. So this is why I fight hard for my kids, their classmates, our neighbors, just all kids around Shelby County to get what they need to be productive and active citizens in our great city, county, and state. I just had a high schooler who also graduated with part of class of 2021, and I have my one to go in 11th grade here at Crosstown High. So I have nieces and nephews, and I'm a taxpayer. And as long as I'm a taxpayer here in Shelby County, in the state of Tennessee, I will always be an advocate for great education options for all students here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cardell Orrin, Executive Director with Stand for Children Tennessee. Happy to be here with you. We work with parents, educators, community members across the community to get them engaged in education advocacy and policy and justice. Now, more work we're doing in the justice arena, advocacy and policy, to change our community for the better, for our children, for our families, and for our communities. I'm also a parent and have a little daughter in Shelby County School in the 5th grade. So happy to be here with you and engage today.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for joining us. So since you guys are all parents and looking at the work that you do, how does that really inform what advocacy looks like for you all? How is that different in the spaces that you work in, your child's neighborhood and, you know, their educational situation? How does that work for you all?
I can say, since I've been in this space, I am more aware, because I didn't get involved in advocacy until my kids were in the 5th and 3rd grade. So, like I said, I'm a product of public schools. So my parents didn't know what I know, so they couldn't make the informed decisions about where I would go to school, and that my local neighborhood school was failing me. So I'm more aware, and I feel like that tree planted by the river, someone planted a seed in me, so I must go forth and plant the seed in someone else. Because that's the only way we can make the difference, if we educate ourselves and we all get empowered together.
Awesome. So I've just got a note that they have resolved our technical difficulties, so they are ready to go ahead and show our video. So if you guys are ready, we'll run it now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like we may still have technical difficulties. So we're going to wing it, and we're just going to talk, because oftentimes you get the best outcomes out of conversations. So I'll kick that back over to Cardell and ask again about what advocacy looks like for you, being a parent in the organization that you work in.
I think for me, and I was raised by a very activist mother who was really involved in parental engagement, especially Title I parental engagement as we were growing up. So in a lot of ways, it feels like a legacy piece to me to continue to work towards getting parents and educators and community members all on the same page to get involved. In addition to just thinking through as I'm going through the process, and even, my daughter goes to an optional school, so there's privilege that's a part of that, and there's additional privilege that we have from a class nature. So and from just the idea that there's people I know who I can call by being in the world of this advocacy work. So even as I go through the process and think about how we're engaged with our schools and our teachers and our principal at the school, in addition to what information comes from the district and the way that we engage in processes there, if we're still struggling to get through processes and get things done, and still having challenges for our daughter, then what's the rest of our community going through that doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the access, doesn't have the connections or people that they can call or know who to call? What are they all going through? So I think for me, it's always through a lens of what's this process look like for me, and what does that mean for everybody else, and whether they feel comfortable advocating for their children, pushing for their children that they shouldn't have to do. So how do we change the system to make sure that less people have to work hard to get their kids a good education?
Thanks, Cardell.
Yeah.
Carra, you mentioned that you are definitely an advocate for parent choice. Can you talk a little bit about how your son's education journey just really sparked this and the work that you all do?
Yeah. So, our journey is unique, but I think every parent and every family has a unique journey with a special set of circumstances and so on and so forth. But, my son, Nicholas, my older two, Sydney and Nick, are just 13 months apart. So they're very close in age, but in their learning style and personalities couldn't have been farther apart, right? And so my older two started at a Montessori school, and it was a great environment. We loved it. It was 2 years old through kinder, and I ended up going through a divorce the year that Sydney was in kinder and Nick was in pre-K 4. And so if any of you have gone through a divorce or a difficult family situation, which we all probably have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially now with COVID, we're all affected by just life and challenges and changes. Our financial situation changed, and we moved. So I actually live in North Mississippi in DeSoto County, so we're a bedroom community of Memphis. We live about 10 minutes from the state line. So we moved and enrolled my children in a public school that next school year, and it was just very different than the environment that Nicholas had been used to. And obviously, going from a Montessori style delivery system, right, to a traditional public school education, it was just very different. And so it just didn't work well for him. And I was hoping to be able to enroll him in our local Catholic school. We have one Catholic school in DeSoto County, and it just didn't work out. I didn't have the finances, right?
Yeah.
And so I was able to connect with a network of schools that are no longer in existence, but were in Memphis. They were the Jubilee Catholic schools, which operated on a sliding fee scale. So they were able to serve families from all different backgrounds with in different financial situations. So we ended up enrolling the older two at the Jubilee. I enrolled the kids at the Jubilee school, and then when Sophia, my youngest, was old enough, she went into their preschool program. And it was a great environment for him at the time. It was a small, very small classrooms. It was very much like a family. So in that aspect, it was very similar to the Montessori program that we had been used to. And it worked well for him. So well, in fact, that there was a documentary done about the Jubilee schools, and my son was highlighted because of the tremendous growth that he was able to achieve there. And then went on from St. John, that was the Jubilee school, to another Catholic school. And so, I talk about school choice very broadly because I think, there isn't a silver bullet to education, right?
Mm-hmm.
It takes all hands on deck, and it takes lots of different environments. We have to have strong traditional public schools. We need to have other options available for families as well. We need to have great, strong, high-performing public charter schools. We need to have private school options for families as well. And so when I talk about school choice and when I'm working with families, I always want them to know from my perspective and from a parent perspective that it's okay to make a different choice, and that as our kids get older. So then Nicholas went to a school called St. Dominic's School, and then from there he went on to our neighborhood public school, because when he was going to high school, it was a good fit for him at that time, right? So our children's needs can change as they're moving through their K-12 experience. And so I think it's really important that families have a plethora of high quality options to choose from. And so when I talk about school choice, that is the experience that I had and that I like to share with families, that it's okay to make different choices as our children go through K-12. But we, as advocates and working in the from a policy perspective and from a support perspective, I feel like we need to do our due diligence to make sure that whatever option a family needs, that they have a plethora of high quality options to choose from.
That's great. Thank you for that. Danisha, you mentioned that just as a parent advocate, right, that you felt like your parents didn't always have the tools they needed in order to successfully advocate on your behalf. You know, we think of advocacy in so many different ways and parent involvement in so many different ways. And it's usually just one model. But can you talk a little bit about what kind of barriers that you may have seen people face when they're trying to go in and say, hey, I think I need this for my child. And sometimes the administration may not hear it. The school leaders don't understand it. How are you helping families and other parents kind of remove the barriers that they may have as they're looking at education?
Yeah, one way that we are assisting parents is that we are sitting in those meetings with them. Like we have Teresina, who is our special education director, where parents having issues with IEPs or they're not understanding their IEPs. She will go with them and sit in their meetings with them. And then Miss Renee, who's our choice counselor director, if families are having issues at school, when that barrier happens where the parent isn't being understood and the school isn't being understood, Ms. Renee will be that mediator that will step in and bring them all together to try to find common ground. And then if they can't resolve their issue, Ms. Renee will assist the families with finding a school that can meet the needs of their child. So it's like being the resource for the parents to assist them with those difficult conversations, to help understanding. Some families may have financial situations where maybe their lights are off and they can't focus on their child when they're having issues with bills, and we'll help them find those resources for that as well. And then sometimes there are issues, communication, where language may be going over the parent's head and they're not understanding what is being said to them, and we help decipher those conversations and help parents get an understanding so they can be there to support their children's educational journey.
That's great. That is real ground level work right there. Yeah, definitely kudos to you all for doing that and kind of stepping in. Cardell, I know that you're with Stand for Children, and I think a lot of people know about them nationally, but I always remind people that, the needs of different communities are really different than sometimes the umbrella under which you fall. So can you talk a little bit about Stan's work here and just how you all approach advocacy here at the local level?
Yeah, I think, I will say that I think a lot of what we've been able to do and transitions we've made over the last few years are informed by, the direction that our national office has set in placing a high priority on how do we get to solutions that will move the needle for our children. And so even as probably one of the oldest ed reform parent advocacy organizations after 25 years, over the last few years, we looked back at all of the great work that we had done around accountability and choice and teacher effectiveness and all these other things, and said, did we really move the needle over all these years for students the way that we want to? and came up and said we didn't do as good a job as we thought we should. So how do we refocus on the things that we think will make a difference for children? And, and that has focused our work in a different way, so that we're advocating for research-based practices, for things that we have found that work in other areas and other places that we can advocate for in other STAND affiliates at our state level, here at our district and with our schools, to make sure that we're continuing to keep the eye on the ball, that we got to know, what are the challenges that we're seeing in the systems and in the schools that need to be faced, and then how do we identify and get support to come up with real solutions, and then how do we galvanize a coalition of organizations and people around those solutions to make sure that that policymakers, decision makers, put those in place and then implement them with fidelity. So I think that, all of those pieces coming together are the ways that we have focused in on ninth grade success with our Freshman Success Network that's in 20 schools, both traditional schools, traditional public schools, and charter schools, where we've helped to develop the Early Literacy Consortium to focus in on early literacy responsibility that we need to take across our community, where it's not just the school's job to make sure that our children can read at grade level, and that our communities and families and adults can read, that it's a whole community issue. Same as our conversations around facilities, that it's not just an individual school problem. It's a community-wide problem that we need to address, that our children should have great buildings and facilities to go to that support their thriving for the future, and career and technical education. All of these things are places where what are the milestones that we know our children need to achieve to have thriving lives, and how do we create the opportunities that support them in manifesting those? And so those are the ways that I think we've been able to focus in on what are the direct solutions that we need to apply, and engage in the communities and members around our Momentum Memphis Task Force, where we really dig in and do the work to really suss out what are these things. And that's the benefit, I think, too, of having parents and educators and grandparents and community members at the table, because you get all these different directions to look at the issues and the challenges. And it's not just about, well, we think this is going to work, but it's here's what we think is going to work. How will parents think about this? How are educators thinking about this? And then how do we present it to the district, to decision makers, to schools, to try to have the best opportunity for success?
That's great. Thank you. And I'll pause here to also say that because this is really just kind of, we're free flowing here, we don't have video, but if anyone has a question, please, by all means, drop it in the chat. We'd love to include you as we're kind of talking about this and what advocacy looks like. So can you talk about a little bit too about some of the differences you've noticed in advocacy and for underserved communities? I think really, if we look at some real hot button issue, right, mask mandates and opt-out provisions, that has been a real difference, I think, in seeing how people respond to one group versus another. And what does that look like over your years of kind of just doing this and being advocates? Danisha, I'll start with you.
You must just saw it just burn in my head. It's like we've seen so many
I did, because I know that you're passionate about this, right?
Are you about mass meetings?
It's just that how certain communities are not heard opposed to others, and I'll get more specific with it. I just saw on the news last night where a group of parents who were thrown out of the school board meeting last night because they weren't being heard about their concerns about COVID in the classroom. But yet you look at our neighbors over here in the affluent area of Germantown, and they just had a handful of parents that went to protest, and now the entire district is virtual. So it's how we treat parent voice in our low-income communities. It's very disturbing, and that's the reason why we do this work, is to amplify parent voice, let parents know your voices matter and how to get your voice heard. So, yeah.
Hey, can I say something?
Go right ahead, jump on in there.
So I want to say this, that, it seems like when I got started in this work many years ago, parents weren't brought into the conversation, right? You had people that were hired to be the advocates, to come up with these plans, to come up with like the agendas and so on and so forth. And I just wanted to say that, you know, groups like the Memphis List, who are now part of the conversation and doing the work and partnering and carrying such a heavy load, are critically important, because, you know, it's got to be what the people want, right? The people that are directly affected by an issue need to be the ones at the table, crafting the agendas, putting the plans together, being involved in the work, leading the work. And so I just wanted to personally thank Danisha, and I know Sarah couldn't be here today, but thank groups like the Memphis Lift for all of the good work that they're doing. And I hope that folks realize how critically important it is to have groups like them doing the work that they're doing.
Absolutely.
I'd say, you know, I think that there's a high bar, and I think there's always been a high bar for parents to get involved. I mean, over the many years, even before I was at Stan has traditionally done parent organizing in schools, trying to build teams in the schools to get them engaged. And my experience has been, you know, that's just it's really challenging work, and it takes a long time. There's a lot of stopping and starting in it, because school leaders don't necessarily value advocacy as much as they should. Districts and even charter networks don't value advocacy as much as they should, only when there's an issue that they care about, and then they say, oh, like, now we need to turn people out. And by that point, it's like, you can't do that in a month, like, unless it's an issue around masks or something that's really volatile. But I think we've got to continue to find ways that, you know, we engage folks. And I think, you know, the really challenging part too for engagement for families and parents, especially in underserved communities, is we're asking the most a lot of times of folks who have the least time, energy, resources to give, to, in some ways, prove that they care and love their children as much as the rest of us who might have the ability to go to a meeting, you know, outside of time. Because, like, we have the privilege of not working 2 or 3 jobs. And so I think that for me over time, it's been, how do we represent and work with communities, especially underserved communities, and parents to get equity across our community, while also, like, being careful about how do we make sure that the people with privilege in our community are standing up for the things that are right and for the things that we need to put in place to have ability that, you know, that parents don't have to try to show up at the school board meeting, like when they're trying to manage many other things. And so I think that that's the balance that we have to strike. And it's also the issue that we continue to push forward of being clear about who the decision makers are, where the levers are for change. So of course they're going to get frustrated if parents show up at the school board meeting and, you know, are fighting for, you know, virtual schools, hybrid environments, and the state is not making allowance for that to happen. So the school board is frustrated, the administration is frustrated, parents are frustrated, everybody's frustrated, pointing fingers at each other, and we're not coming together to say, okay, how do we advocate together? How do we work together? How do we even play out this whole scenario so that we're getting the things done that we need to get done and putting the pressure where it needs to be laid, and creating workarounds where it makes sense to create workarounds. So I think those are the pieces where, you know, pulling everybody together and trying to identify the ways that we push. And when we need to push, let's push and push hard. But, you know, we got to identify when's the time that we need folks to push, because, you know, everybody can't show up for 5 different meetings per month.
Right.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, I used to say that all the time for those who are in the room. I used to work for the district, and I would remind people on a regular basis that, you know, we tend to think that parent involvement and parent advocacy is being a part of the PTO. Parent advocacy and parent involvement is also when the parent picks up the phone because they have heard about some policy and they're calling and they're complaining. And they have called our office to say, I have a problem with this. I can't show up here. I work from XYZ time. I'm at Nike overnight. I can't do that, right? And so it's very important not to limit what we think is parental involvement and parental advocacy, right? It is different for everyone, and you're absolutely spot on. And I see people in the chat saying, yeah, people with privilege have got to show up. And I think Dina Simmons' point earlier about, saying that these are all of our children, right? That everyone in every position has got to believe that all kids matter, all kids require and need, the same value and attention. And we have to do that. And the only way we can do that and ensure that someone else who is working third shift at Nike's kids are also taken care of is somebody who can show up at the meeting and can be plugged into some of these other organizations are advocating on their behalf as well. So it's all critically important, I think, to what we're doing here. Danisha, I know the Memphis Lift is like real grassroots. You guys are somewhat new to the scene, new kids on the block in some aspects. What tips would you give to other parent groups and parents that are wanting to form coalitions and organizations like yours?
I would start off by saying definitely staying humble, and piggyback on Cordell's point, this is slow and respectful work. I mean, things are not gonna happen at the snap of a finger. They're not gonna happen overnight. Like, we didn't get into this mess overnight, so we're not gonna get out of it overnight. Knowing your community, it's like when you step into these meetings and this advocacy room, it's like, don't lose focus of why you're here. You're here for the children. If you have selfish reasons for doing this, like, I do this work for the outcome, definitely not for the income. I'll say that again. I definitely don't do this for the income. It's for the outcome of all of our children and students here in Shelby County. So I definitely would say stay humble. Remember, this is slow and respectful work. And you have to meet parents where they are. I think that's how we get the bulk of our successes, because we can relate to parents, because some of the situations they've been through, we've been through them as well. So knowing your community, being humble, and slow and respectful work.
Absolutely. Carra, what about you? Do you have any tips for people wanting to kind of get into this parent advocacy space and form organizations?
Yeah, I think Ms. Fields hit the nail on the head with her tips, but I would add too that, if you're working in a coalition or you've got partners, figure out who in your coalition, what partners you can reach out to and work with, because you cannot do this work alone. It's like Ms. Fields said, it's very difficult work, it's tiring work, it's slow work, it's tedious work. But typically, you've got coalitions, so lean on those partners in your coalition. Figure out kind of if you all have some priorities that you can align on and work together on. When I came into this role, Cardell, I have leaned on him very heavily because Cardell has been doing this work in Memphis for a very long time in the public school space. Huh? Yes, I'm saying
that's why we were gonna wait to get you at the end, because you have a long history. So.
Oh yeah, he has a history, and so all jokes aside, he has working alongside people like Cardell, just as a sounding board, and then as a partner, and figuring out sort of what priorities our organizations can align on and work together on projects and so on and so forth. I think it's really key. So a lot of times we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can work with folks that have already started on something, and we can work along with them, or we can launch something, start something new with somebody that's already committed to the school choice space. So that's what I would add.
Cardell, and you can round us on the home on that.
I mean, I think I just underscore what Danisha and Carra said of, that there are definitely, opportunities to get involved. I think a lot of times we don't have to start new things, and it's how do we connect in with the things that are doing, and it's also how do we as advocates and organizations get better about sharing the avenues for getting involved and lower the barriers to getting involved. I think, you know, we were thinking about some of these things over the last 3 years, I'd say, going 3 years back, where, you know, we'd started doing sessions down to Civil Rights Museum, but streaming those online to try to make sure people could see, like, the events that we were having. And I think it's taken it to a new level now with the pandemic, where it's been a necessity that we got to go online. So even as we think about, you know, it's been more challenging now as we thought we were coming out of it, but even as we think at some point, hopefully coming out of the pandemic, where we have more in-person meetings, where all of our meetings were in person, you know, it's always been the dream. How do we make sure that transportation, that getting to a geographic area is not a barrier to folks being involved? And I think we've found out over this pandemic time that we can meet virtually, that we can engage, and now we've got to find out how do we do more hybrid stuff, like not just in schools where we need it, but and in our community environments and in our meetings where, you know, we can have people come in because of limited time or ability to get somewhere, to be able to better balance that, to have more opportunities to engage, and constantly thinking about what are the barriers to folks getting involved, of either access to information, of the way that the information is communicated to them and to the community, of the ability to understand, okay, what are the actions that I can take to impact a specific area, and what's the information that I can provide, what's the input that I can provide, where can I best fit in to being able to shape an agenda and work it through to the end. And so I think that all of those pieces also come back to the idea of working in coalitions, where a lot of our focus is these days around identifying, you know, who has the connections to different people and different communities, who has different information and different pieces that we can pull together. So that, and I think a lot of this, and my experience with it, goes back to the Memphis Education Fund is sponsoring this conference, and a lot of the learning and information we have on this goes back to even us coming together as education advocacy organizations and really having to think together, okay, Memphis Lift, Stand for Children, BAYO at that time, we're all doing parent organizing. Even Charter Center at one point was doing parent organizing. We're all doing parent organizing. What's our lane? What are we doing? How do we not butt heads? How do we work together? And I think that having that conversation and working through that process really helped to lead to, okay, like, what are the pieces that we can come together, and how do we play together and work together well? When the Memphis Lift had their individualized learning plans that they were advocating for, you know, I think part of the way that we tied into that was, how do we come together with some of the educators that we have at our table and support and think about how does it get interpreted at the district or by educators? So we all developed together My Child's Learning Path, and then they get passed back to Memphis Lift, and that, you know, and now that has shaped, you know, a really significant piece that will be really beneficial to our children and families that they've led, and that hopefully we will eventually see come to fruition in terms of the information and dashboards and what we can get to see as parents from the district. So I think being able to tie all of those pieces together and continuing to move efforts forward, and being really clear in what are the things that we see as the challenges, and what are the solutions and the asks that we have of the different levels of government, of Shelby County Schools for improving education, of the city and county for funding that, of the state for funding that, for what we're talking about across this conference of social emotional learning and how we support the mental health needs and even health needs of our children, and all of that has to be funded. And so, you know, and at every level, city, county, state, federal, all have to be contributing to these solutions that will impact and support our students, our families, and our communities moving forward.
That's great. Thank you, Cardell. That's a lot for us to think about and a lot of work for us to keep doing. So I'd like to thank everybody for hanging out with us. And sorry about the technical glitches, but we powered through, and we still got a lot of good things to kind of think about how we advocate and how we can do this better. So thank you guys again. And in order to get back to, I think there's a closing session, you'll just click out on leave the meeting and then go back to the Expo Pass in your link, and you can join everybody back there for closing session. Thank you all. And thank you again to our panelists. You guys are awesome. You're doing great things around the city, and we just look forward to seeing more of you.
Thanks, Venita.
Guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.